Good morning, everyone. Dan Bates, President and CEO, Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce, and we are really glad you could join us today for Coffee and Conversations. Today, we have Jennifer Meek, and she's going to be talking about culture. So we'll introduce her in just a little bit. Let me just tell you how this works if you haven't been here before. We are on a Zoom meeting, so if you have questions, you can either raise your hand, put it in the chat box, or I'm sure Jennifer's fine if you just interrupt her and ask a question. If you're on Facebook Live, type your question in, and Tiffany or Laura will repeat the question to our presenter so she can answer it for you. So with that, also this will go on our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you want to refer back to anything that you wanted a little more clarification on, something you think you missed, you can always look for our YouTube channel and review it later. So with that, you know who I am, you know you're on Coffee and Conversations, and now we're going to find out who all of you are. So I'm going to turn it over to Gino.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gino McGowan. I am the newest member to the Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce team. I'm the Director of Member Relations, but you don't need to know about me. You need to know all about the wonderful presenter we have today. So I'm going to go around and just introduce to everybody. You can say a couple words. Pretty much, I know half of the people. I'm still 9 weeks into this, so excuse me if I don't know everybody by their first name. And I've got one person that has info at SWCD, so I'm not sure what your name is, but I'm going to introduce you that way. So matter of fact, you'll be the first one. So good morning and welcome.
Hello, so I'm Kelly Kraut. I'm the District Director for Butler Soil and Water Conservation District.
Thank you so much for joining us. To my right, at least on my screen, is my good friend with the wonderful golf swing, Mr. Christopher Cannell.
Good morning. I'm Chris Cannell. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator for the Hamilton City Schools.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining, Chris. And right next to him is a good friend of mine from way back, Mr. Ben Cornish.
Well, thank you, Gino. Good morning, Paul. Glad to be here. First
say that again, Ben. I don't know if I caught the last part.
Okay, I said First Financial Bank, Ben Cornish, Community Outreach and Financial Wellness.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben.
You're welcome, sir.
All right, so I'm looking around. Jeff Gambrell.
Good morning, everybody. Jeff Gambrell, Volunteer Services Community Engagement Manager at Serve City on East Avenue. We are a homeless shelter and food pantry serving Butler County. Glad to be here this morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to introduce our wonderful staff, and I'm going to save you for last, Jennifer, if you don't mind. I know that Tiffany, I know you're having problems, but Tiffany Grubb, who is our marketing manager. Good morning, Tiff. Nancy O'Neill.
Good morning. I'm Nancy O'Neill. I'm the Director of Leadership Hamilton and Events here at the Chamber.
Thank you. And we've already met our fearless leader, and last but definitely not least, Laura Merrill.
Hello, everyone. Laura Merrill with the Greater Hamilton Chamber.
Thanks so much for coordinating this also, Laura. So now we are to the meat of the conversation. Miss Jennifer Meek, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Gino. I appreciate that. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I know that we're going to have some conversation, and I definitely have some coffee, so feel free to join me. And there you go. Gino's got some as well. Well, I appreciate you, Laura, being my Vanna for today's discussion. So even though I've got a presentation, as Dan mentioned, I definitely am open to you interrupting, asking questions, and frankly, I'm going to ask you some questions. So I definitely would love for this to be interactive. So we're going to talk a bit this morning about culture. So I know we hear a lot about it. We talk quite a bit about it. And with your organizations, many of whom I'm familiar with, and some of whom I'm not. Let's talk about how we can build a conscious culture. So next slide, Laura. So again, we did some introductions. You all went around the room. That's fantastic. Again, I'm Jen Meek. I go by Jen or Jennifer, either one, and I'm with HR Elements. We're going to talk just a bit about who HR Elements is, but our commitment to you, we feel strongly about our values. And we're going to talk quite a bit today about values. So flexibility, expertise, caring and committed, and a level of high integrity. So I'm going to answer your questions. And if I don't have an answer to your question, I will definitely get back to you. I'll make sure that we adhere to the time schedule. So I know we're here till 10. I'd love to keep you engaged and ensure that you at least have one nugget of information that maybe you take back and think through, and maybe, you know, even deploy within your organization. So prior to HR Elements, I've been head of HR. So I've sat in that seat for various industries, including distribution, retail, and healthcare. My last role was a multi-billion-dollar distribution company for oil and gas. I've been a CEO of an HR consulting group and have broad experience in HR and now in organizational development. So at HR Elements, I do quite a bit of work in that space. Culture being one of them, engagement work, coaching. So again, I'm happy to be here. Next slide, Laura. So just a quick overview. I don't know how many of you are familiar with HR Elements. We've been in business for 17 years. All of our employees, we have over 20 employees. They're all remote. We do have a presence in Cincinnati, Dayton, Northern Kentucky, and now Florida. And we have 3 areas of focus: HR management, recruiting, and my favorite space, organizational development. So our agenda today, as you can see, we're going to talk about how do you place culture on the top of your agenda. We're going to talk about some metrics. How do you quantify? So how can you quantify your culture? And then how can your organization ensure that they live their cultural values every day? And we're going to discuss a successful company's story. And again, we'd love to hear your stories as well. So normally, I don't know if this will work for you, Laura. So let's not, since we're having some technical issues. I'm curious how many of you are familiar with Kahoot. Kahoot is typically an interactive game where I, as your host, would ask you a battery of questions and you all can participate. Maybe in the chat, or just feel free to speak. Have you guys played this game before? Anyone familiar with Kahoot? Gino, and no. Okay. We'll do the somewhat. So we have SWCD somewhat. So Kahoot basically is an interactive game, and the name of the game is speed and accuracy. So how quickly you can answer those questions. So what I'd like to do, though, to get a little bit of engagement, I'm not going to go directly to Kahoot, but I know what those questions are, and I'd love to do that poll now. And again, just speak up and let me know. I don't know if I've got a pair of eyes in the chat feature. It looks like it'll pop up in my screen here. So I'm going to ask you the first question. This percentage of U.S. employees strongly agree that they can apply their organization's values to their work every day. Do you all think that's 13%, 23%, 33%, or 37%? What percent of U.S. employees do you think agree that they can apply their values to their work every day? We see 23. Dan says 13. Gino says 23. Ben says 13. Chris says 13. All right. Well, the answer is 23%. So 23% of United States employees agree strongly that they can apply their organization's values to their work every day. So we have another percentage question for you. This percentage of employees strongly agree that they believe in their organization's values. Is that 27%, 28%, 37%, or 38%? What do you think that percentage is that employees strongly agree? We got Gino at 28, 27, 38, 28, 28, All right, if I could do the Kahoot music, I would do it, but you definitely don't want to hear it that early in the morning. The correct answer is 27%. So 27% of employees strongly agree that they believe in their organization's values. So what can we do, within our organizations to make sure we can increase that number? Because again, values are tied very closely to an organization's culture and how employees feel about them and how managers can make sure that folks and they personally are living to those values every day. And the last question, who is best known to have said, culture eats strategy for breakfast? Was that Stephen Covey, Peter Drucker, Marcus Buckingham, or Stephen M.R. Covey? Who do you think said culture eats strategy for breakfast? I'm not seeing any answers. D. Covey, says Gino. B. All right, well, these are all business authors. Peter Drucker said that. Peter said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you may have heard that term before. And again, he was the business, I'm gonna call it business management author that indicate that. So we can see if that's the case or not. Strategy is very important. So let's move to the next slide, Laura. All right, so we're here today to talk about culture. Why is it important? And if you want to unmute or put it in the chat, why do you think culture is important?
I think because it determines the workforce environment.
Absolutely. Because every environment's a bit different, isn't it, Gino? Yeah. Anyone else? Why culture is important? I'd like to look at it from three areas. When you've built and established a good culture, it improves engagement. So staff engagement is important. And you've probably read and heard about a lot of those statistics, particularly with Gallup. Gallup is known to do engagement surveys, and they have a lot of statistics out there. And I think, unfortunately, one of the most recent statistics is that there's about 60% of employees that are disengaged. So that's the current stat out there. So really trying to ensure that if you've got a good culture, that you've good staff engagement. Engagement leads to productivity, and productivity leads to to profitability. Also with culture, it helps employee retention. That's an important piece too, so that you can keep the folks that you've worked so hard to bring into your company. And it also aids with employer branding. So employer branding is really key when it comes to attracting and hiring new folks. They want to know what your brand is out there. They hopefully are asking you in the interviews, what are your values or what's important to you? And what I hear quite a bit is being able to articulate your why. If they ask you, what's your why? Why do you guys do what you do? And that's different than the mission. Knowing what you do and why you do is different than the mission of your organization. So we're seeing quite a bit of that today. And that a positive workplace culture is really one that's built on meaningful work, open communication, and again, these core values, we're going to keep coming back to that. And lucky for employers who have a meaningful work environment, once an employee has that strong workplace culture, they don't have very many reasons to leave. And so you can see on the screen here, Laura's got the survey. So we had a few of these questions in the poll within Kahoot. But you'll see here that in a survey, and this is a Vistage survey, and this was from the end of last year, that there are over 1,500 CEOs from small and mid-sized businesses. 11% of them said they are satisfied with the strength of their company culture. So 11% is kind of a low number. 95% of American workers say that the overall fit is crucial to happiness in their jobs. Are they happy with what they do? What gets them out of bed in the morning? I always like to ask, what gets you out of bed? What are you passionate about? And happiness in the job will definitely lead to engagement and lead to retention. 16% of companies are now fully remote, and 62% of employees now work remotely partial time. Of our participants today, what is your remote structure? Do you have a hybrid workplace? Are you all remote? Are you all in the office? So Dan's hybrid. I'm sure we got a lot of different structures. Jeff's all in the office. SWCD is all in the office. What's SWCD again? Southwest. Gino, I missed that. Oh, soil and water conservation. Okay, thank you so much. And the chamber, you're all in the office, but you've got a few remote. And I think Chris said you're all in the office. Is that right, Chris?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And how long have you been all in the office? Since all the mandates have changed?
Yeah, as soon as it was okay to come back, with masks or finally without. Because I'm with the Hamilton City Schools, so I'm over the school board.
Okay.
The principals and, we're all back. I mean, there's some obviously there's students that are homeschooled.
Yeah.
Administration, we're all back.
Okay. Yeah, I see periodically within our school district, there's not too much of that, obviously, but periodically there might be a remote option for folks if there's a, in-service day. And I wasn't even close with soil and water. I was thinking Southwest, so my apologies there. So here again, with some of the statistics, 85% of managers believe that remote work will become the new norm. Obviously, based upon the industry, schools, manufacturing, many of those roles do require that you're in either the facility, the factory, or the office. For CEOs who have pledged to create conscious culture, remote workers, they need to be accounted for, right? So just making sure that if you do have some remote folks, that culture and building those conversations and building the communication with that group is really critical. Ensuring that it's not an afterthought, but, I think now the world we do Zoom, Teams, all these virtual, Google Meet, et cetera. It's just real important that folks feel connected to the organization. And then to kind of finish some of the survey notes here, 23% of US employees strongly agree, as we saw in Kahoot, that they can apply their organization's values to their work every day. It's important when you look at values, are those clearly stated? And beyond that, are they clearly lived every day? Meaning it's not just, listed on the website, or it's not just listed, within, and some folks I've seen in organizations, they've got their values, posted in the break room or posted in, throughout their facility. But how do you ensure that you're living those every day? One of the things that we do at HR Elements is we have monthly calls, monthly team meetings, and we recognize folks that have lived the values. So we recognize them. So we talked about integrity, expertise, caring and commitment, and flexibility. So when those values are seen, we recognize those so that they become, as we might term it, living and breathing. And then here's examples of what that means. Flexibility is not the same definition at every organization. Sometimes we talk about integrity, and that's obviously very important in any organization, but how do we show what that means at the organization or at the company? So there's different ways that you can do that. And you can see here, how do we try to bring some of these statistics up. Again, they're national, and I'm sure in your organizations these are different if you would poll or ask your employees, but just a little bit to get us thinking today about some of the statistics out there related to culture. So next slide, Laura. So we talked about culture, but let's talk a bit about a conscious culture. So who would like to tell me, if you go back to that previous slide though? Thank you. Sorry, I'm used to driving. Who would like to tell me, or you can do it in the chat, or come off of mute. What is a conscious culture? What does that mean to you?
That'd be
Anyone like
something
to
that's
share?
clearly stated and practiced every day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Who said that?
Chris.
Chris, thank you. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
And Dan said culture that you are actively. Put you on the spot there, Dan.
Cultivating.
Cultivating, absolutely. Yeah, so it's intentional, right? You're clearly stating it. You're living it every day. You're cultivating it. It's not okay, here's our culture and let's move on to the next. It's really trying to ensure that you're putting that at the top of your agenda. What does that really mean to the organization? It's when you define a culture, it's how you do what you do in the workplace. How do you define that? How do you clearly state that? And that if you look at their systems, there's behaviors, there's values, and all of those create an experience for your employees and also for your customers. And as when you're in sales and development and leading the organization, what are the customers looking for? A lot of times they want to align what they do with an organization's values as well. So it's not just for employees, but it's for the customers. And really, company culture is, again, how do things get done? How do we get things done here in the workplace? How do we tie that to values, behaviors, systems, processes, some of which are formal and some of which are informal? So next slide, Nancy. Yeah, so it's the sum of all these parts, teamwork, equity, diversity. I would also say a sense of belonging, that folks feel like they belong to the organization. And again, that you're building, it's good to great, that you're building these great companies. And if you hit the button one more time, here's a culture. So again, built on purpose, it's intentional, and that you have the commitment. Again, it's an investment of your time and your effort, and that companies operate, that it's equally important, again, to your outcomes. And you have these strong foundational principles. Those strong foundational principles will tie to the value as well. So when we talk about those foundational principles, here's what we'd like to include in those principles. So wellness. We talk a lot about wellness, but it's ensuring that the team's health and the well-being come first. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of sessions and events out there talking about making sure that employee well-being is really evaluated, that it's really looked at, because even as leaders, we look at ourselves and we've got to be healthy, and there's a variety of ways to look at what that well-being looks like. As we all know, going through the pandemic, I think that's part of the reason now that's highly critical, that we're looking at how we feel physically, emotionally, financially, all those different ways around wellness. But again, those foundational principles help create this intentional culture of how we do things at the company. We look at diversity. There's a lot of discussion around that. these days as well, that we welcome people of all backgrounds, beliefs, and philosophies. Again, the sense of belonging is critical too. So when we look at surveys and we poll our employees, we have an opportunity to be able to look and determine, do they feel like they belong in the organization? Do they feel like they fit? So that that leads to happiness, that leads to engagement, which leads to retention. Trust is definitely a component of that. And this cultivation, I think, Dan, you said that, is how you create, that culture, you cultivate it. And part of that is, it all begins with trust, right? That you're transparent and you have candid communication and collaboration. I think folks, particularly from a communication perspective with their leaders, really want to know the facts, be as transparent as you can. And that is this level of vulnerability, but it definitely creates this culture of, I feel like I really can trust, my supervisor, or trust my leader when I ask him or her a question, that I really feel like they give me an honest, transparent response. Good business, again, ethics are very important, not only for the employees and the team, but also for the customers. And then, looking at standards, we talk about processes, that there's this level of accountability. That's another area too, that we're holding ourselves accountable and that we're holding others accountable for what we've asked them to do. What are the expectations that we set? When you look sometimes at how we do things, if you're asked to do something and, it's not done, what happens? What's that level of accountability? And I think we see that if that's not handled appropriately, other people see that as well and go, oh, well, even though they said we have to do it, if you don't do it, nothing happens. Sometimes you can kind of look at it with your children if you have kids, but if you tell them to do something and that's the expectation and they don't, what happens if they don't? Is there disciplinary action, for example? Of course, there's other ways to do that, but what is that level of accountability? And finally, what are the results, so that you're prioritizing those business outcomes? Many times is that profit, is that productivity? If you're nonprofit, what that mission is. So really, culture is this unseen force that connects and motivates the behaviors of your employees. But we believe these are the foundational principles. So where do you start? If you're building, or perhaps you're rebuilding, a conscious culture, it's recognizing that your company might be ready for a change. What do we need to do? Is it time to really look at it? Is it, what is creating that need to perhaps rebuild? Or if you're starting with a new group of folks, that's another way to look at it. And it could be a full culture rewrite, or you might just need to have some tweaks. So I'd like to ask this group, because a lot of it's based upon what your employees say, the feedback from your employees. I'd love to know what feedback you've gathered. How did you gather it? And we'll go on to that next question in a minute, but how do you all get feedback from your staff, from your employees? Anyone do surveys?
My employees pretty much say whatever they want to at any time as part of any discussion. So
that's great. And who said that?
That's Dan. They don't hold back. And
okay.
They know that I value that and welcome that.
Good. That says a lot about your leadership style as well, Dan.
They can disagree with me and often do.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's important, because disagreement, don't always have to agree, but that level of disagreement can definitely push us in different directions that we may not have thought about. But communication is key, getting that feedback. And then what do you do with that feedback, Dan? Do you have an example that you might be able to share?
Well, I would, I have a lot of crazy and wild ideas, and I think that, I think their feedback makes those ideas doable. So, I think I have pretty good ideas. I don't always have the best way of implementing it. So, the feedback from them sometimes takes in a different direction, sometimes tweaks it, or sometimes we don't move forward at all. So, it's, I do value the feedback. I don't always like it, but I do value it.
Well, I'd love to hear that because I've always said that feedback's a gift. Whether that's done, verbally. So I think you had mentioned, one-on-ones that you have, group meetings, and really look as a gift. What do I do with that feedback? And I think one of the important pieces is that, and it sounds like you're doing that, Dan, is that, you're listening and being able to say, hey, I think this is a great idea. Let's go ahead. Or, maybe it's not the right time. Let's put that on the back burner and, look at it later. Or in some cases, it may be, hey, we're not going to be able to do that, and this is why. And that, you don't always have to agree. You don't necessarily always have to do what the employees are asking, but that you're listening and responding appropriately. Does anyone do any type of formal survey? I'm curious with their teams, or been in an organization where you've done that?
I've been in organizations where that has been done poorly. That, it's a survey, but you're afraid to be honest. And, because the culture was, they were doing the survey because somebody told them they should, but they didn't really want the results. And that's more from when I was in corporate America. It's like, so it's the type of thing, you're taking the test and what they want to hear. Which is more damaging than not doing a survey at all.
I totally agree. I've worked with organizations that had surveys that they've done before, just like that, Dan, and it went very poorly. In those cases, I would not recommend doing another survey. If so, then more the transparency of, hey, we did this before and we did a poor job. We did not do it well. Here's our commitment to you. And what I have seen, and it can be disastrous. And maybe that's what you saw, Dan, is that you ask for feedback and then you do nothing with it. And people are like, well, I gave you my thoughts and then I didn't even hear what the results were. I haven't seen anything come out of it. So why would I provide you feedback if you're not going to do anything with it, or at least listen? And I think that's a big piece that we're seeing with employees, is they want to be heard. They want their voice heard. And how do you hear them? And it sounds like, Dan, what you've done is in a variety of ways. Hey, anytime, any place, share with me what you're thinking. And that says to me a lot about your culture that you've established there at the chamber. Other ways, again, there's formal surveys, there's pulse surveys, there's stay interviews. I don't know if anyone has done those, where it's a little bit more of a formal, but it's one-on-one. And those stay interviews are asking how they're doing today. Is there anything that might indicate that would give them a reason to leave, so that you're finding out what's going on before someone leaves, and you're doing an exit interview going, oh, well, I could have corrected that, or I could have done something different. But this ongoing communication, Dan, you mentioned one-on-ones, scheduling those, ensure those are scheduled, so that that's a great opportunity to get feedback on performance. And hey, how do you think things are going around here? And being that willingness even to ask as a leader, how am I doing? You saw me at that meeting. How do you think I did? Or we just did that. Getting that level of feedback takes courage, but it also helps you be a better leader. And then for those of you that have some remote workers, how do you account for those employees? What do you do to ensure that they're included? We had, I think, a few folks that were hybrid.
Yeah, no, I can jump in here. At least with our hybrid and how we're set up, we're all pretty much in the office at least 3 days together, if not 4. For the majority of the team, there's nobody who is fully remote. So, we kind of develop that culture while in the office, while also making sure we have enough team events outside of the office be it, happy hours, sporting events, volunteer events for charity, just making sure that there is that out of office time to kind of get to know people better, even though we're, in the office a little less than we were pre-pandemic.
So do they get to choose the days, or do you have specific days depending upon department when folks can work from home?
So we have specific days based on department. However, obviously, if somebody has something that they need to take care of, say, a doctor's appointment, or depending on what part of town they live in, I personally am in sales. So if I have meetings, I currently live in the Kenwood area. But if I have meetings up in Dayton or Butler County, I would primarily work from the office and then head up there and take my meetings or work from a coffee shop. So it's flexible depending on what you have going on in your position. But in terms of full days, those are determined by department.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Appreciate that. It sounds like having those team events and face-to-face time, makes a big difference. Anyone else like to share any thoughts for the group? Okay. Well, our organization is completely remote. So I think for us, even to your point with those team events, we do those as well. We actually also utilize the space that we have collaboration days. So a lot of our folks are out of clients, but I think now it's twice a month. Folks can go into a shared office space and do their work and kind of build a little bit more of that collaboration. And it kind of a get to know you, and it feels like I'm really in an office support kind of function. So it's neat to be able to see that level of interaction, and I think that helps us connect a little bit more as well. And then if we had to put some steps, if you're building or you're rebuilding or thinking about, how do you do that to build a conscious culture? Here's some thoughts that we put together. Again, put the culture on top of your agenda. Making sure that you're thinking about, how strong is our culture? And that's, I wouldn't say testing necessarily, but that's the feedback. Even in part of your one-on-ones or asking your employees informally or formally, how do you think we're doing? How would you describe the culture? Being able to articulate that. Are you really making it a priority? And you got to remember that, to develop that culture starts at the top. So Dan, as the leader of the chamber, it does start with you. It doesn't mean that, you burden all of that, culture's all on me, but when your folks see you and hear you and know that you're open to that level of feedback and you're doing the one-on-ones, it really sends a strong message. But again, as the leader, you need to create, promote, and reinforce your ideal culture. You're going to leverage your leadership team to ensure that your employees understand and really embrace that culture. And you're going to demonstrate behaviors that exemplify it, right? Kind of the second thing is also evaluate your culture with quantifiable metrics. It's directly connected. So culture is directly connected to hiring and retention. So for example, turnover, the time to hire, employee engagement, and employer net promoter score. There's some really quantifiable ways that you can do it. Just shed light on your strengths. And then what are some areas of development within your culture? Again, some of those pulse surveys, and again, you may do it formally or informally. So maybe there's a program or something that you want to put out, or something with the benefits change. You could do a quick pulse survey to kind of get, their input to that. Again, I'm going to say that the culture it's really this unseen force that connects and motivates the behaviors of your employees, and it really becomes the brand of your business. So when you think about the chamber, you think about First Financial Bank, you think about, Hamilton City Schools and some of the others that are represented here today on the call. Really what's your culture, and what's your brand? And when folks think and mention your company, what do you want them to say? What do you want them to say about you? there is some way that you can quantify that, so that as you're building this conscious culture and you're cultivating it, that you can determine through feedback and other ways, how are we doing? Are we living up to what we said we would be? And again, living your cultural values every day. So, ask yourself, how do I show up for work today? Do my actions reflect my values? Am I walking the talk? Am I leading by example? Am I holding people accountable? Am I living to, the caring and commitment, for example, one of the values you hear at HR Elements? Am I committed to do that? My level of expertise, am I able to share that with other team members? And not just within my client base, but is there a way that I can, share that? So again, living those values every day. And then finally, we would say communicating, we call it the MVV, your mission, vision, and values. Again, it's this conscious culture is intentional, and it's also consistent. So I think Dan said that, and Chris mentioned that as well today, of that cultivation. So it's really ensuring that it's, you're doing it consistently, and that you really talk about a consistent message. And once you articulate your mission, vision, and values, that you make sure your actions and your attitudes communicate the same message. So I work with an organization now, and within their job descriptions, and they are a nonprofit, but they do state their mission, vision, and values in every job description. So, that's just one piece of it. It's on their website, but it's really important to them that folks understand that as part of your job, it really is infused within every role to live by and work towards the mission, vision, and values. How are we doing on time, Laura? Looks like we've got about 16 minutes. So how do you quantify culture? Anyone in the group like to share any metrics that you might use? Put you on the spot. Do you have anything that you use at the chamber to quantify that?
We really don't. I mean, we're a small team, but
Yeah.
I generally know when somebody's not, like, something's not right. I have in the past, checked in on somebody and said, are you okay? Because, people have personal lives also that impact. We say leave it at home. That's not reality. So, if somebody's dealing with something, not being nosy, but I kind of like to know what's on their mind, to know, if it's something that needs to be addressed or something they just need a little time to deal with, or, if I know what somebody's dealing with and they say, look, I got to do something for a couple hours, I'm a lot more understanding and empathetic.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
it does. And I'd say it might be a little bit more testimonial, a little bit more anecdotal, but your employees well enough and they're willing to share with you what's going on, that allows that, relationship to flourish. And I agree with you, Dan. And I do work with some that say they try to separate personal and work. And you do bring personal issues and personal things with you to work. And I think to say that you don't, to your point, is not accurate. But you've built that rapport and you built that trust. So, even when we talk about some of those steps, they trust you enough to share that with you. So when we look at some of the ways to quantify, it can be, anecdotal, testimonial. It can be maybe some KPIs, so key performance indicators that you've set for folks, tracking some of the expectations and the behaviors. Again, a survey, you can quantify it with net promoter score, and maybe even some special event KPIs that you've established. If you go to the next slide, Laura, there's really, in some research, there's factors that you can use to start assigning a quantitative value to your culture if you wanted to. So again, as you're building or rebuilding, and if you want to see how you're tracking and you want to use some metrics, one of them, for example, is formality. So you think about, how formal is your culture? Does everyone dress up in jackets and ties? Do you work inside enclosed offices where everyone's focused on their title? rank or hierarchy. I'm not saying that's good, bad, or indifferent, but you could look at it in that category, if you will, of formality. You know, and I could say within our culture, ours isn't very formal. So part of this, when we kind of go through some of these factors, is being able to articulate that many times to a new hire. You know, how do you describe your culture, or how do you guys do things around here? You know, there's some organizations we work with, and we probably could name a few of those that you've either worked for or with or know of, that are more formal. You know, that some today still dress up in jackets and ties, you know, still expect everyone to dress in that fashion, that everyone does need to be, you know, in their office working. Another factor to look at is analytics. You know, how does your organization treat data? Does everyone focus on spreadsheets and making decisions on what the data tells you? You know, we don't make decisions without data. Is that something that you would say or not? Again, analytics, again, being another factor. A third factor is transparency. Some organizations hold on to their data pretty tightly. Others, if it's P&L or balance sheet or, you know, some of the other data, they're more willing to share. Maybe it's executives only. You know, if you're a small organization, maybe everyone is familiar with it or aware of, again, beyond financials, but that's one piece of it. Another factor is team or individuals. Some organizations are highly collaborative, where all the work is done in teams. There's motivation, there's celebration, performance of the team as a whole. Other organizations may reward individual contributions and performance. So, for example, you might see an organization like Mary Kay that's really based upon meeting individual goals or quotas. Another factor is innovation. Some organizations are super innovative, like, for example, 3M, where everyone's focused on coming up with great game-changing ideas. Others may not be as innovative. The other one is frugality. So there's some companies that adopted a strategy of being the low-cost operator. I think we can think of one, you know, being Walmart. So another factor would be humor. So you can look at some of these factors that you may not have thought about to help quantify or help even describe to existing employees or new employees. Again, thinking about it from an employee branding. You know, humor can be an important tool in organizations to alleviate stress and to help build teamwork and camaraderie. I can tell you, when we have our team calls on a monthly basis, there's a lot of laughter. And I know for me, humor is really important to me and having fun. So when I look at working for an organization, I think of, for example, formality, analytics, transparency, performance tracking, innovation, humor. Those are all factors that we consider when we define a culture. So it does go beyond KPIs and engagement surveys and some of the one-on-ones, but, you know, really put it into these factors or these buckets to help determine and help quantify and describe, I guess I might say a little different, describe your culture to someone else. And, you know, frankly, Dan, and what you've shared, I'm getting a sense of what your culture is at the chamber. And I'm sure I could probably say the same for others. The more, you know, you hear and you talk about how they do things at the workplace, you know, it makes a difference and it helps define that. Any questions or additional thoughts on the quantification or the metrics around culture or the definition in your organization?
I would just like to add, I know at least in our organization, I have a pretty experienced team, matter of fact, very experienced. And, you know, I would hope that the culture contributes to their ability to make their own decisions and you know, be leaders. So they know they don't have to run everything by me, and they know that they are empowered to make decisions. So sometimes maybe I push too much for them to make those decisions, but you know, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I want the organization to continue to move forward. So the other thing I just like to mention, we recently, you know, had a job opening, and you know, what a switch from just a few years ago. When I had interviewed a couple people, and all they were interested in really was the salary. They had no interest in benefits or anything else. And this time around, we had 37 applicants, and I think he interviewed 17 of them. and narrowed it down to, I think, 12 face-to-face interviews. The thing that shocked me was everybody had the same interest, but the younger the applicant, the more they were interested in longevity of the team, which surprised me. I did not expect that to be such an important conversation in those interviews. Everyone brought it up. They wanted to know how long the people who were here had been here, how long the person had been here who left, so I thought that was very interesting. And many asked about, would they be able to contribute in a meaningful way? So, salary was like third, fourth down the road to those other issues.
Well, I do like to hear that. I do hear more about that. To tenure, contribute in a meaningful way. How do I contribute to the mission, the vision? How does what I do make a difference? So I love to hear that happened, with your most recent hire. Tying into, I think what we mentioned at the beginning is the why. Why do you guys do what you do? Maybe they would have asked or described the culture, but that's helping them better understand, is this going to be a good fit? And I think many times folks want to make sure that it feels right, that maybe they'll meet with a few other folks on the team to get a better sense of that. But I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's a good sign that ties to, am I going to be able to work for an organization that I believe in and that are tied to my values? And if people are leaving, longevity is not there, that might make a difference for them making that decision. So next slide, Laura. Just some thoughts here on how do you nurture. We talked about, the cultivation and that it's a consistent and continue to work on it, if you will, kind of initiative. And in some cases, it comes naturally for folks. Maybe for you, Dan, you really haven't thought about, formally, how do I define this culture? How do I nurture this culture? But you're doing that, on a daily basis. But here's just some thoughts around how do you nurture that culture? So defining your clear purpose, your actions are aligned to that purpose. So to your point, folks want to contribute in a meaningful way. What's the purpose? And what do I need to do to align with that purpose? Support the transparency and fairness. And that, this humility, this dedicated leadership, when folks see that, they see the reality of leaders and their vulnerability, it says a lot that, okay, they're human, they, there's things that bother them and they might get a little stressed as well. And that humility of, hey, I want to surround myself with successful folks so that, if I do get hit by a bus or something happens, that folks are able to step up and, and lead. And then keep reassessing your culture. Is this the culture that you want? Is there any changes that you want to make? Again, why do you exist? It's not the mission, it's the organization's why, and that you're showing your company values with everyone. Next slide, and we've got about 4 minutes left. I do want to share a success story here. So culture is a living thing, and it will weaken or mutate if it is not continuously reinforced by what you say and what you do. The other piece I think that's important is that having a level of a safe environment, that if you want to challenge the strategy of getting to a certain level of financial goals, and Dan, I feel like I'm picking on you, but you've been very interactive in today's session, and clearly you have a safe environment that folks they share with you what they feel and if they disagree. And I think that aligns with the culture that you have there at the chamber. So let's talk about the success story. So next slide, if you would, Laura. So I don't know how many are familiar with Risk Source Clark Theaters. It's a insurance agency, and Amanda Schultz is their president and CEO. And I had an opportunity to really talk with Amanda and ask her to describe, the culture. And I guess this is one that I would deem, and we would deem, a success. So when you ask her, and I put her email in here because she really beams when you talk to her about culture and the organization. And she's been with them for, a very long time, and is now recently been promoted to president and CEO. And she talks about her culture being very collaborative, very intentional, you plan for it, you strategize for the what she calls the essence of culture, and making sure that she ties back and the organization ties back to the core values, that they make decisions, they give recognition to teammates. I believe this bucket list at the bottom that you see here on the screen is more of a recognition and rewards program, if you will, that they put in place to make sure that there's accountability, but there's also rewarding the behaviors and the successes. And they really try to make their values active, and they do so, on a daily basis. So any situation they believe aligns to the value and that they can address it. And she really felt that that was a game changer, that they're very intentional, at the forefront. You can see they do surveys. It's a very small screen, I know that, but this was just some of the surveys that they do, and they host those internally. They don't use a third party, but they're continually asking their folks, these questions to have a better sense of how they're doing, how they're tracking, if they need to pivot or do something different. So they do measure those surveys with the Net Promoter Score. They do best places to work surveys. I think, as if their goal is to be a best place to work, and they've achieved that, and they get that survey data and look at that and be able to help ascertain any changes they need to make. Stay interviews they do as well, and she was very proud to say they didn't lose anyone last year. I think the industry tends to be a little competitive. They've also been inspired by the book Purple Cow, which was authored by Seth Godin, and it allows everyone to engage and promote and recognize others because you get points. And so this is part of their recognition program as well. And they're very transparent about their goals, and they have 7 major goals, and they always do a theme for the year. And that theme is really helping to connect remote and employees that are working in the office as well. So I really felt this was a success story because if you're familiar with them, they have a good brand out there, and they're very intentional about building that conscious culture. And I will leave you with another thought. There is another organization that we work with, and what they've done is they have alumni. So when it's a group of folks that after they leave the organization, and again on good terms, they have alumni, and they just recently celebrated the anniversaries of the alumni. So it's just another thing to think about when you think of the employee life cycle, and how you treat employees, how you treat candidates is just as important when they leave. And, there's folks that leave for a variety of reasons, and they actually put those folks into an alumni network and stay connected with folks that previously worked with them. And I thought that was such an interesting way. And for me, that would describe their culture, in a unique way. So I'm looking at my clock, and I know I've talked quite a bit, but we're at the 10 o'clock mark. And I'd love to be able to answer any questions. Laura, you may want to move to the end of the presentation, that sends my sincere thank you for allowing me to help host this coffee and conversation. I did get a few sips of my coffee today, and I appreciate being a part of this. You guys have been a really, really great group. Any questions for me?
Not a question. I think this has been really terrific information.
Oh, good. Appreciate the patience of everyone too with some of the technical difficulties, and Laura for being my Vanna.
You're very welcome, Jen. That certainly was extremely informative. Would you like to tell people how to get in contact with you if they have any questions?
Absolutely. So you can email me at jmeek@hrelements.com. And Laura, I know this has been recorded, and you have the presentation, if you wanted to send that out to the participants, okay. I'll be sure that my email is included in that.
That is perfect. I will get that out to everyone today. We appreciate you taking some time to be with us. We will be back again for our next Coffee and Conversations on Tuesday, June 27th, 9 a.m. We have got an amazing presenter set up for that day. So if you ever want to check out past participation or presentations, we have them on our YouTube channel. They're also on our Facebook. So I know there's a lot of people that go back and resource these later. So they're definitely very informative. So always go back and check those out. So I appreciate everybody taking some time to be with us today, and we will see you all in a couple weeks.
Thanks so much. Have a great
Thank
day.
you all.
Thanks, everyone.